So I initially started in the Recruit College in 1981. We were recruited as special members of the protective service component of the AFP in those days to get around the ceilings on employees. So I did the first 2 years on embassy duty, and then in 1983 went back to the college and did a transition course for general duties. So I've been in general duty since 1983, but in the AFP since 1981. I did a lot of time on that. That was mobile patrols of embassies and static points, which is really fun, sitting in a box for 8 hours. Woden Police Station in general duties, the warrants and process unit at the old legal branch, traffic representations in judicial operations, and the last 3 years here at Belconnen. As part-time member of the DVI team, I was deployed to Phuket after the tsunami in 2005 to work there in the reconciliation phase of the disaster victim identification response. And I was prepared for it, but it was quite a sort of confronting job. You know, you're dealing with a lot of deceased people, photographs and that sort of thing. And in a similar vein with the Melbourne bushfires, I went down there for 4 weeks and worked in a similar area there. And you know, you wouldn't be human reading some of the paperwork and seeing some of the photos that you didn't say it did affect you. Luckily, we had the AFP psychologist come down and talk to us, and we went all right with it, but it was certainly confronting, but for me, probably a career highlight. The Winchester murder. I was actually working that night. Where Mr. Winchester was murdered was about 2 streets away from where my parents lived at the time. I'd actually contemplated going to see them that night to drop something off that I had to give them, but never actually made it there. And then I spoke to the investigators and just said, you know, I was in the area because they were obviously checking people that had been around there. And then there was another strange coincidence with that particular case. When I was working in the warrants and process area, we were accommodating the Melbourne building. And I had, in those days, a blue Mazda 2-door vehicle. I came out from work one day to find a note on it, I want to buy your car. And I thought, this is very interesting. I rang the number, and it soon dawned upon me that it was David Harold Eastman that I was speaking to. And he said, you know, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm in the public service. He said, I'm interested in buying your car. So then I rang the people that were in charge of the investigation. I think it might have been Sergeant Dick Thrift was the person I spoke to. And he jokingly said, well, do you want to sell your car? And I said, well, it depends how much you want to give me to sell it. So that was really quite bizarre. And then a little bit later on, I actually served some summonses on him. It's gone from typewriters and handwritten stuff to everything now. You know, I was involved in the AutoSite project, have been since 1994, but the technology's increased. Unfortunately, the paperwork hasn't reduced as a result. You would think it would, but the paperless society that we're supposed to have with computers. But I mean, now we're using iPhones, members are using iPhones on the road, there's iPads are going to be used, we're using AutoSites, lasers. The technology's just gone leaps and bounds since the early 80s. But like I say, unnecessarily, the job has got even more involved in terms of time that you spend with paperwork. So has it been a good thing? Yes, but on the other hand, perhaps it hasn't delivered all the things it promised to us. Domestic violence orders and restraining orders were first came out in about 1986. And one of the first domestic violence orders I served was on a fellow that lived in Chifley. And I went there to serve the order, and he came out and he said, I know why you're here. I'm going to kill myself. And I said, how are you going to do that? He said, with these scissors. And he showed me a pair of scissors that he had stuck in his stomach. And I said, looked at him, I said, but they're a pair of nail scissors. They've got round edges on them. Don't be silly, give me the scissors. So I pulled them, took them out of his hand and said, now let's sit down and talk about this domestic violence order. So that was sort of, and someone said, oh, but he could have bled to death. I said, I recognise them as nail scissors because my wife's got a similar pair. They're blunt, they're round noses, they're not going to stab anybody. The worst he could have done was perhaps, you know, stuck them in his eye or something like that. But he was a rather large man, stuck him into his stomach, and he was quite, there's a fair bit of fat there. He wasn't going to hurt himself in any way. So that was the one I remember.